Welcome to the Inside Out Culture Podcast, where we look at insides of working culture and provide ideas, insights, and actions for you to take on the outside. I'm Colin Ellis.
And I'm Kath Bishop. And in each episode, we'll examine a different question or a different organisation. And we'll use case studies, research, and our own insights and experiences to help you change the way things get done in your world.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please like, subscribe, and of course, let us know what you think. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Inside Out Culture Podcast. And today, Kath and I are going to be talking about our favourite TED Talks. We didn't talk about this before, but what was the first one you remember watching? Kath, can you remember TED Talks?
Oh, I think it might be one of the ones that I'm going to choose, actually. So,
okay.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. Do you have a specific memory?
Yeah, I have a specific memory. It was Simon Sinek's TED Talk on
yes.
What was it? The
why and the how.
The why and the how.
People buy why, people don't buy what.
That's right, yeah. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it, which is nonsense. But yes, that was the first one that I remember. And yeah, I'd say, and Kath's done 2 TED Talks. We shouldn't, you should, the thing at the end that you need to go and do is watch both of Kath's TED Talks.
They're quite old now. As a thing, I often recommend it to people, actually, sort of sometimes as part of coaching, if they're sort of either wanting to think about their career or who are they as a leader. And I'll say, imagine you're going to give a TED Talk, maybe just a 5-minute one, because there are now these TED Shorts. How would you sort of put it into that? Or people who are thinking about writing a book and they go, I don't know what the theme would be. I don't quite know. I've got these different ideas. And I'm like, well, could you create a TED Talk that's your USP? That's who you are. So I do think it's quite a useful concept for things like that, to really hone in on what's your key message. What are the 2 or 3 stories that would really demonstrate that? And so it is a good thought developer as a tool. It's hard because you have to be really disciplined about what you leave out and you have to really be clear about what you want to say. So the process of doing one is as important as what the outcome is.
Right. Well, let's talk about our favourite TED Talks. I'll get straight into mine. And my first one is a favourite of mine, which I share in all of my workshops. And it's by a guy called Derek Sivers. Derek Sivers, I think, is a software developer or was a software developer. He developed some software around it's like a Napster type app for those that you remember it. I think that's what it is. I'm not suggesting in any way, shape or form it was piracy, but it was some form of music app that he then sold, which allowed him to do other things. From what I've read about him, I've read a couple of his books. He's a fairly introverted individual, which makes this 3-minute TED Talk on how to start a movement all the more impressive if he's kind of nervous to actually do it. And so it's called How to Start a Movement. And basically what he does in 3 minutes or just over 3 minutes, he completely deconstructs leadership. And as listeners to the show will know, Kath and I have talked about this a lot. Leadership is one of those things that's very, very difficult to do. We talk a lot about leadership. It's very, very difficult to put yourself into service to somebody else 100% of the time. It's almost impossible. But, the intent has to be there. And what basically Derek Sivers talks about in How to Start a Movement is about becoming somebody that people would follow. And which is when I saw this TED Talk, and I was just starting out in my own career. I'm like, I want to be someone that people would follow. But then it's really, really important, and he talks about this in his TED Talk, to nurture that first follower as an equal and recognize the ripple effect that followers have. The other thing that he talks about is publicly proclaiming your standpoint. This is who I am. This is what I stand for, but then being accountable to that. It's not enough, and we talked about this in a previous podcast, it's not enough just to say these things. You have to kind of live it every single minute of every single day. And the last thing he talked about, which I loved, is this kind of cultural sensitivity, is how the context within which you're working really influences the dynamics of your leadership style. I think often what I've seen in some organizations is people get into leadership roles and then they go, I'm a leader now, the hard work is done, when really it's just beginning. And so what I really love this, kind of how to start a movement. And whenever I look at great cultures, Cisco is a client of mine, a fabulous culture. why is it a fabulous culture? Because Chuck Robbins, the CEO, is that guy that started the movement. He's a fabulously personable guy, even though he oversees this multi-billion dollar organization, but he knows what he stands for. He puts it out there. He's got time for every member of staff that he comes into contact with. And Cisco continually evolves to meet the environment in which they're operating right now. So that would be my first pick.
Really strong themes there. Followership is something, isn't it, that often the military talk about as well as a really key element of leadership, which you can see working there. We can also see how in this social media world, my God, the whole concept of followers has morphed into something where it's really hard to feel that you're perhaps equal with everyone and have that connected relationship. So yeah, I look forward to looking at that. So I'm going to start with my absolute all-time favorite, which is from Margaret Heffernan, and it is called Forget the Pecking Order at Work. I love all her books. She's got another one coming out in 2025 about how artists and creative actors, etc., the creative world embrace uncertainty. And I think what leaders and the organizational world can lead from that. But her pecking order TED Talk is a great one. She tells the story of an evolutionary biologist who studied chickens. And he was interested in the question of productivity, which is, of course, something we talk about, everybody talks about in organizations, everybody wants more of. And he said he used chickens because you can count the eggs. So it's an easy measure of productivity. And he wanted to know what would make his chickens more productive. So he devised this little experiment. And of course, chicken live in groups. So he had one group that was just a sort of average flock, and he just left it alone for 6 generations. He then created a second group of the individually most productive chickens, maybe sort of, the superstar chickens, super chickens, and he put them together in a super flock. And each time he just selected only the most productive ones for breeding. So then the experiment kind of goes on, and after 6 generations, what was the result? Well, the first group, the average group, were doing great. They were plump and whatever, egg production had increased dramatically. And in the second group, all but 3 were dead. They'd pecked the rest to death. The individually productive chickens had only achieved their success by suppressing the productivity of the rest. So it's just such a lovely story. And it really then, she goes on to hone in on the importance of social connectedness. And there's lots of research around social capital, and that is what creates a robust company, that has a kind of momentum, a sense of growth, a sense of innovation. And I just think it's a great listen. I love all her work. She is very thoughtful, and yet it's all common sense. And so she really kind of attacks this question of, the superstar cultures and, recruiting the top of the top of the top, because actually it's what happens between people that matters. And that's something that I've seen and experienced and see in the work that I do, that we really want to kind of think about what happens between people. And again, she uses the artistic world, the music world, where sometimes when they're looking at auditions and, the Royal Academies, they're actually not just looking for individual superstars, they're looking for what happens between people, because that's where the drama occurs. And for me, I find increasingly my work in organizations, I'm helping people think, particularly when we're looking at teams, becoming better as a team, at what's happening between you. Yeah, that's where the kind of beauty happens.
I like the idea of super chickens.
No, we don't want super chickens.
Yeah, they've all got these little capes on and they're running around. It's a really great TED Talk, again, if you haven't seen it. And I love those TED Talks. And Brene Brown doesn't make our list. And yet Brene Brown's TED Talks are peppered with humor. And for me, humor is crucially important, which brings me onto my second one, which also then touches on music. Now, as someone who uses music so I use music in my workshops a lot. And I remember it was either the very first or the second workshop that I did with music. Someone said to me, "Oh, that's quite a novel approach, using music." I didn't think it was that novel. I'd been to a workshop years and years ago that used music, and I loved it. I was like, I'm going to copy that. And so I was like, oh, right, well, I'm just going to Google, kind of the power of music. And I came across this TED Talk called The Transformative Power of Classical Music by Benjamin Zander. Now, I also read a book by Benjamin Zander called The Art of Possibility, which is brilliant.
Yeah.
It's absolutely brilliant. If you haven't read that book, we'll put a link in the show notes. But the Transformative Power Class of Music. So he talks about vision, he talks about possibility all through the medium of music. The reason that I love the TED Talk, and I mentioned right at the start, the anti-establishment nature, is kind of with a TED Talk, there's like a little area where you're supposed to stand and you don't really move and you deliver. He just goes into the crowd straight away, like nobody's expecting it. He goes straight into the audience, starts interacting with people, and the camera's kind of, if you watch it, the camera's kind of trying to follow and go, what's he doing? Why is he in there? But it's fabulous. So he talks about vision, he talks about possibility, he talks about leadership, about how it's not about command and control, again, all through this kind of conductor, because he's a conductor of an orchestra. And it's about the leader's role is awakening the possibility in others, what you're swept along with. And it's a fairly long TED Talk, but it's one of those things you can't stop watching because he's just so passionate about his subject matter. And you know that it means something to him. And I guess that's where passion comes from, is that sense of authenticity around his subject matter. You just can't fail to be swept along with it. And obviously there's a lot of its credibility. But the key thing that he talks about is this, the long line. And the long line is, don't get bogged down in the day-to-day minutiae, the day-to-day detail. And it's very easy for us to do that. When I first saw the TED Talk, I was working in a government job. And at that time, I must have been bogged down in the day-to-day detail as you do in the public service. And it just gave me this sense of, just keep focusing on the vision, focus on the medium to long-term goals. I was very much thinking about my own development at those times. Those day-to-day issues are just challenges that you need to overcome in order to get you down what he calls the long line. And obviously, we talk a lot about culture and it being evolutionary. Kath even wrote the book, The Long Win. These things take time. Yes, there are things that you have to do day to day, but it's keeping that sense of focus. And then the last thing that I took from it, which I mentioned, is the sense of breaking convention. There are certain conventions, and I'm pretty sure he used the TED Talk and the way that he did it as a mechanism to demonstrate how you should do that. And again, that's something else that I always did in my career, is I recognized the conventions that were worth breaking. And I'm not talking about breaking rules. I'm talking about challenging certain things. But there are just culture, we're very social animals. We tend to follow a lot. And sometimes we follow the bad as well as the good. And so, you very much made the point about there are these rules, there are these conventions. And I think the example he used was Chopin. And he said, there are some things that you can challenge that will give you an advantage. So yes, that's my second one, is Benjamin Zander's.
I really like his book, The Art of Possibility. Yeah. And that is something I drew on a lot, kind of writing my own book. He's a very inspirational character. So my second one is actually going back to a real inspirational character, a real classic. I think it's sort of one of the leading TED Talks of all time. It is the incredible Sir Ken Robinson, Do Schools Kill Creativity? And he tells stories in such a compelling way, and he just takes this step back to think about, what is education for? How have we now constructed it? And he talks about how if an alien came to look at education system and say, oh, what are you trying to do? You're trying to rank people, find out who's the best at something. Why are we hierarchical about education? Why aren't we unlocking what every child is capable of? So in a similar way to Benjamin Zander, in a way, he's trying to explore human possibility. And he realizes that's a very diverse thing, and that we don't all have to look the same. And this sort of much broader sense of what are we capable of? And for us to get more aware of our education systems, but also our work systems, which are stifling us, constraining us. Again, we have this question about, how do we achieve higher targets at work? How do we become more productive? The question is not by constraining people. And yet often the culture, the ways of working are doing that. And so I just love this idea of seeing everyone in terms of, what are they capable of? What creative ideas do they have? And of course, children are full of such incredible ways of thinking that aren't stuck in silos, and they ask the impossible, and they want to draw the impossible. And he tells this lovely story of a little child who, is drawing something. The teacher says, "What are you drawing?" And he says, "Oh, I'm drawing God." And the teacher says, "Oh, but no one knows what God looks like." And he says, "Oh, well, they will in a minute." Just gorgeous, really, again, inspiring and, tapping into that sense of endless possibility that's within each of us. And that for me is a really warming, optimistic view that we need in this kind of sometimes challenging world.
It's brilliant. Utterly inspiring. It is the most popular. I just checked. It's the most
26
popular,
million, maybe more than that.
78.3 million views. It's from 2006. Still relevant today.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
That's what's so amazing.
It's still relevant today. Okay. My last one is actually a fairly obscure one by a guy called Dudley, who did a TED Talk on everyday leadership. And much like Margaret Heffernan, where she focuses on the small, common sense things that you can do. This was 2010, I think, and recorded in Toronto. If anyone's seen it, Dudley, he's got this really big hat on. Yeah, just utterly memorable. Everyday leadership. The key thing that I took from it, he talks about the impact of small acts, which he calls lollipop moments. And he tells this great story about how he's collecting money for charity. And he's doing it at a university where parents are dropping their children off for the first time. And he could tell there was a really kind of nervous student getting out the car. She really didn't want to go. And so he went over and gave her a lollipop because he was doing I think it was for cystic fibrosis that he was doing this collection for. He gave her a lollipop and he said to the parents, "Look at that. She's already taking candy from a stranger." It kind of broke the ice. And then this other guy came over. Anyway, long story short, these two people that met on this very first day ended up getting married. He got invited to I'm spoiling the TED Talk for you. He tells it way better, obviously. However, the point is, and the lollipop moments is, you don't realize, and this is the everyday leadership, you don't realize that the impact that your behavior has on people at any one time. And I remember doing an interview, I think it was last year, and the interviewer said to me something like, what's one thing that you're always thinking about? And obviously, besides the family and all these kinds of things, I said, I'm always thinking about what's that one interaction that I can have today that might make a difference to the person that I'm interacting with. Because it would be very easy just to think about yourself all of the time. And it all comes back, that answer comes back to Dudley's TED Talk on everyday leadership, is those small moments every day. He also talked about the sense of satisfaction that he took from it, not in a kind of hubris kind of way, but, celebrating the small win for yourself to say, today I did a really good thing, not telling your mates I was brilliant today, but today, and that made him feel good. So yeah, Everyday Leadership by Dudley would be my third.
Brilliant. It reminded me of a book actually that came out last year by a fantastic executive coach, Sarah Langslow, which is called Do Sweat the Small Stuff. And it's making a lot of those points as part of it. Right, for my third one, I'm going into the sports world to Valorie Kondos Field, who is an incredible gymnastic champion. And it's a very moving talk. It's called Why Winning Doesn't Always Equal Success. And it came out in 2019. And it was for me, it was just a kind of moment of reinforcing the belief in the concept of the long win. I'd been writing the book for 3 years. It was more or less finished. I still felt it was really heretical and dangerous and risky to challenge winning. How can it be anything other than good? It's the only thing that matters. And I heard her TED Talk and I thought, yeah, this is, it's so obvious that we've got things wrong. And just gave me that sort of conviction. I actually reached out to her. She was very lovely, wrote me a testimonial, we had a lovely conversation. But her talk in 2019 is all about why winning doesn't always equal success. She's an incredibly successful gymnastics coach in America in terms of championships won, but she actually talks about that isn't success, just winning the trophy. She talks about the crisis in win-at-all-cost cultures that are in our schools and businesses and politics, and how, we honor the people at the top of the pyramid. We applaud those who win championships or elections or awards, but often they are actually leaving their institutions, their professions as damaged human beings. Kids with straight A's, they're leaving school damaged. Athletes are leaving their teams with medals, but they're damaged emotionally, mentally. And, the same in the organisational world. We've become so hyper-focused on the end result that the human component of how we got there gets swept under the rug. And so does all the damage. She tells some beautiful stories of, herself, how she started off sort of copying what she thought good coaching was, being, dogmatic dictator all the time, but realizing eventually that actually that kind of produces compliant, good little soldiers, good little gymnasts. But it doesn't develop what she calls champions in life, doesn't enable people to really, again, explore what they're capable of, be the person, help them become the person that they want to be. And she tells a beautiful story around Caitlin Ohashi, who's someone who had a gymnastics video that went viral, who arrived at her gym, broken in body, completely, hating gymnastics, supposedly on a sort of scholarship, but saying, I don't want to be good again. And she was like, my goodness, Chris, how the hell am I going to turn this round? And how could somebody who's so brilliant get to that point? And, it's her journey of kind of learning that, of seeing the human, not the gymnast, and really challenging her own ways of operating, listening to feedback, not just seeing somebody as somebody who scores points, but as somebody who's learning and growing and figuring stuff out. So it's bringing that kind of human piece back into our definitions of success. Very aligned with The Long Win, and I quote from it. And as I say, she kindly endorsed the book. But it's just a beautiful example from someone who's very eloquent, who's lived, and explored this question of what is success.
So they're our favourite TED Talks. If you've got a favourite TED Talk, maybe we haven't mentioned it or haven't referred to it, please do drop us a line, insideoutculture@gmail.com. We are always looking for ideas. We're always looking for inspiration. At the end of every show, we end with 3 things: something to do, something to get curious about, something to uncover, which I just captured here, Kath, as we were going through. I think do look for inspiration everywhere. I think if you can develop or devote, it's probably a better word, 30 minutes a day to looking for a little bit of inspiration. It's often hard to do, I know, but if you can, look for, and it doesn't have to be a TED Talk. It can just be in an interaction that you witness.
It can be a moment.
It can be a moment, yeah.
It's not time bound, but...
Yeah, absolutely. So something to do, look for inspiration everywhere. Get curious about the action that you can take. Kath, I don't know about you, but sometimes I watch a TED Talk, I think, gosh, how do I do that? But there's usually one thing, right? One thing that you can do. You're like, okay, well, here's something that I can do.
Even sharing, just, gosh, this has really struck me. It's really resonated with me. And so sharing that can be a great way of also helping that process.
Well, and the thing to uncover is one idea worth sharing. I think that's the tagline for TED Talks anyway, is ideas worth sharing. Don't keep them to you. If you found something worth sharing, don't keep it to yourself. We've just shared the 6 TED Talks that we like, but, if there's one that really inspires you, why not share it with other people? Say, no, you can't force them to watch it, but, I found this really interesting. I think you might too. But now it makes me want to go and watch more TED Talks.
I know, there's just so many ideas out there. But yeah, I think we often consume slightly randomly, don't we? Just whatever comes up on the phone. And so make a conscious choice to, I really want to watch this today, or I'm going to share this, ask somebody else. Because often people have played around and got a couple that they really like. So it's also great sort of conversation across the team. Some people are very into them. Some might never watch them. People also often, it enables you to go in a different direction, a non-work direction. Someone who's really into music or really into sport, and then they offer stories and metaphors that, of course, apply across the organisational world too. So it often opens our minds, ideas, possibilities. And I think we need a bit more of that in a world that often has too many constraints.
Yeah, and different people consume different types of content. Kath and I, write regularly. Kath's written for The Guardian. I write a daily blog. And people like those short things, or they like the longer things. I write a really long article that people like that, but maybe not the short one. People will like to watch videos. Some people like audiobooks. People like podcasts like this. Recognize that different content can provide different inspiration at different times, and broaden your horizons and see which one works best for you.
Great. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to today's Inside Out Culture podcast.
Please remember to like, subscribe, and of course, share with others who you think may be interested.